6. Rio Shipwreck. The Black Sea was experiencing a pattern of storms in December 2018. When one of the massive storms hit, the crew of a cargo ship named Rio was navigating the seas. Calls for help were made to the nearby port of Novorossiysk, but the rescue effort was unsuccessful because of the severe weather. The crew's only other choice was to run the ship aground in order to avoid more damage. Near Kabardinka, the crew practically docked the ship into a sandy cove. The crew's lives were saved, and there was no more damage to the ship. The boat was securely planted in the sand, and since it was immobile, it remained there. The owner of the ship intends to recover the wreck and eventually take it back to sea. A lot of people have been drawn to the unique site, which has elevated Kabardinka to fame and increased tourism. People go to great distances just to see the wreckage. 5. The Shipwrecks at Land's End. The small entrance to San Francisco Bay has ideal circumstances for shipwrecks, thanks to its dense fog, powerful tides, and hazardous rocks right underneath the water's surface. International shipping supported San Francisco's thriving economy through the gold rush era. Until the turn of the 20th century, over 300 ships met their end in the dangerous waters of this shipping channel. The SS city of Rio de Janeiro was by far the worst and expensive of these tragic accidents. She got to the Mile Rock during dense fog on February 22, 1901, while traveling from Hong Kong to San Francisco through the Golden Gate. Of the 210 people on board, including the captain, William Ward, she lost about 130 within 8 minutes of sinking. The 82 survivors clung to debris until an Italian fisherman came to help. After the disaster, bodies washed up at Fort Point for many years. The construction of Mile Rock Light, a lighthouse built to prevent more accidents in the tight strait, was motivated by this heavy loss. 3 ships, the Ohioan, Lehman Stewart, and Frank Buck, are now visible from Land's End. On October 8, 1936, early in the morning, the SS Ohioan, a cargo ship owned by the American Hawaiian Steamship Company, came aground near Seal Rock. The crew remained on board in the hope that high tide would eventually release the ship as the thick fog cleared and the Coast Guard tried to rescue the harbor pilot. A crowd gathered to watch as attempts were made to save the ship over the next few days, but none were effective. Both the Frank Buck and the Lehman Stewart were tankers built at the same shipyard and sank in the same channel. Frank Buck joined Lehman Stewart in 1937 after she ran aground in 1922. Although the engines of both ships were destroyed by explosives in 1938, they're still pretty visible during low tide. 4. USS Arizona. On December 7, 1941, at about 8 in the morning, the crew of the USS Arizona were just starting their day when it was docked at Quay F7 on Battleship Row. The crew had no idea that torpedo bombers were about to launch an attack. The Oklahoma, West Virginia, and repair ship Vestal were among the ships struck, but the USS Arizona suffered the greatest number of casualties from the strikes. The bombs made one of these hits close to gun turret 2, and within seconds it had struck the first and second decks before stopping at the third and detonating. The boat sank to the bottom of the ocean and soon turned into a firestorm, covered by smoke and flames. The explosion's fire consumed 4,600 tons, or 4,173 metric tons, of gasoline over the next 2 days. On board the USS Arizona, there were nearly 1,700 soldiers. Many plunged into the murky water in an attempt to live. In the end, all of them died by flame or water, and the attack on the USS Arizona is still one of the deadliest naval catastrophes in U.S. history. The USS Arizona was built with enormous ambition. Its name symbolized Arizona becoming the 48th state of the Union in 1912, and the ship's construction only took 15 months. It was a 608-foot-long, or 185 meters, $13 million ship with torpedo tubes and 14-inch cannons. that had a peak speed of nearly 21 knots. It was one of the most dangerous battleships in existence. The ship's ability to carry 1.5 million gallons, or 5.6 million liters of fuel, and run on gasoline instead of coal astounded everyone at the time. But regrettably, this was more of a barrier than an advantage. The USS Arizona had its inaugural voyage to the Caribbean after its construction was finished, despite the fact that the ship's engines still had issues that were later resolved after returning to New York. The ship was taken to Chesapeake Bay, where it was moored. Even though the U.S. was preparing to enter World War I, the ship was later sent to Pearl Harbor in 1940, where it served until 1941. The vessel's weapons and turrets were removed after the attack on Pearl Harbor and reused, but the actual ship could not be fully saved. As a result, the USS Arizona Memorial now stands on top of it. Even now, oil seeping from its hull serves as a reminder of how violent the event was 75 years ago. Have you ever been to Pearl Harbor? Tell us in the comments and hit the subscribe button while you're at it. 3. The Almost Ships. The Imperial Japanese Navy tried to scare the United States with their huge Yamato-class battleship. As tensions rose in the Pacific during the lead-up to the war, the Second London Naval Treaty, which Japan refused to sign, was allegedly breached by battery arrangements. The Yamato-class battleship was viewed as a significant danger in the Pacific by Britain, France, and the United States, who invoked the Escalator Clause to allow an increase in the size and weaponry of their major vessels. The U.S. began developing the Montana-class battleships quite quickly. But as the Pacific War progressed, this huge battleship lost its importance. This led to the cancellation of 5 more ships before they were even built. But as history has proven, wrecking these vessels wasn't a huge loss for the Americans. Aircraft carriers have already started to play a more significant part in modern naval combat. The battleship Montana, a successor to the Iowa class, was designed to have 4 turrets with 3 guns each, and 12 16-inch, 40.6 centimeter Mark 7 cannons installed on them. This was an improvement over the 3x3, 16-inch, 40.6 centimeter gun arrangement used in the Iowa. The objective of the Montana classes was to create a battleship that could compete with Japan's Yamato while also being slower, stronger, and more heavily armored. The U.S. Navy was able to build the most heavily equipped battleship in its history, without the Second London Naval Treaty's restrictions. But before construction could begin, the United States was dealt a devastating blow that drastically changed its plans: the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Imperial Japanese Navy on December 7, 1941, forced the U.S. to join the war. American military strategists had to make a major decision. They had to decide whether to keep working on the Montana class, which wouldn't be ready for a few more years, or stop and concentrate on other battleships. The decision was made to cancel the Montana class. A catastrophic move by the Empire of Japan caused the construction of the USS Montana, BB-67, USS Ohio, BB-68, USS Maine, BB-69, USS New Hampshire, BB-70, and USS Louisiana, BB-71, to be completely canceled on July 21, 1943. The attack on Pearl Harbor almost destroyed the U.S.'s Pacific Fleet, but the U.S. Navy recovered much more quickly than anybody thought they could. And as they did, a new kind of battleship came onto the scene. The Americans came to understand the effectiveness of their aircraft carriers by the middle of 1942, after the Battle of Midway. The carrier-led force was able to significantly harm Japan's own fleet, despite lacking the bigger, more powerful ships. The Battle of Midway changed the course of the war and contributed to the Allies' victory in the Pacific. It also helped the idea that battleships were no longer as valuable as they once were. The Iowa-class fast battleships and Essex-class aircraft carriers, which were already under construction, were given precedence over the Montana-class battleships. The era of battleship passed, and the aircraft carrier's rise began. 2. Ghost Fleet. A fleet of wooden steamships was built in shipyards around the country in order to support the war effort against Germany during World War I. Birds now built nests on the boats, and bats raised their young inside the hulls. In the Potomac River at Mallows Bay, Maryland, there are still more than 100 old ships providing a semi-submerged habitat for fish, beavers, waterfowl, and more. The first National Marine Sanctuary designation in over 2 decades was made by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in July 2019 for this 18-square-mile area, or 46 square kilometers. Along with shipwrecks from the Civil War and the Ghost Fleet of World War I, the Mallows Bay Potomac River National Marine Sanctuary also has Native American archaeological sites dating back almost 12,000 years. The U.S. Emergency Fleet Corporation was established by President Woodrow Wilson in 1916, and it immediately began building hundreds of ships to counter the German U-boats as they sank passenger and cargo ships in the Atlantic. During the war, none of the ships actually made it to Europe thanks to technical and construction problems. The majority of them were hauled along the Potomac to be rescued by nearby businesses, which eventually just dumped them at Mallows Bay. In an effort to promote tourism, educational activities, and new jobs, public officials and environmentalists in Maryland proposed the spot in 2014. It sought to gain federal funding and boost site monitoring. The nomination was put on hold while waiting for the governor's approval, because of strong opposition from people who relied on the Potomac for their livelihood. They were concerned that more rules would harm their industry and lives. Mallows Bay offers kayakers the chance to explore shipwrecks and see a variety of animals, including bald eagles and osprey birds. The best shipwreck diving spots on the planet can be found at this spot. 430 wrecks and airplanes are protected by the National Marine Sanctuary System, which consists of 13 sanctuaries and 2 marine national monuments. The last location to get a NOAA designation in 2000 was the Thunder Bay National Marine Sanctuary and Underwater Preserve. Then, until NOAA could verify that it had enough resources to maintain its existing inventory, Congress put a hold on any more sanctuaries. 1. Gold Rush ships. Under the city of San Francisco, California, there is a large ship graveyard. In the middle of the 19th century, during the gold rush, these ships were built. Many of them, carrying gold prospectors, were simply abandoned in the harbor instead of being sent back to their ports. The ships were covered by construction, and as time passed, they were largely forgotten. But some of them have since been uncovered and brought back into the public eye thanks to the laying of new building foundations or the construction of tunnels under the city. San Francisco was a town of little significance throughout the first half of the 19th century. Due to Mexico's loss in the Mexican-American War, the small community joined the United States of America in 1848. The gold rush started the next year after James W. Marshall allegedly found gold somewhere in Coloma, California. As a result, prospectors were drawn in droves to the state, and San Francisco quickly expanded into a city with tens of thousands of residents. For those looking to participate in the gold rush, there were only 2 options. One path was by land, and the other was by sea. The former was the shorter of the routes, but the second option was the faster, assuming you were starting your voyage from the East Coast. The bulk of prospectors chose to travel by water, which may not come as a surprise to some. Many of these ships were left in the harbor after reaching San Francisco. Some of the owners purposefully dispatched them on their final voyage to San Francisco, even though they were, in some cases, too run down to make the trip back to the ports they originally left from. Other times, crew members, including sailors and officers, left the ships in search of gold. The number of abandoned ships increased until it reached almost 1,000, filling the harbor. Other ships had to be anchored in deeper seas farther from the shore because of this. Porters were also required since products had to be moved over the shallows. Hiring porters cost a lot of money, which decreased merchant earnings. The decision was made by city officials to resolve this issue by bringing the shoreline closer to the deeper waters. They intended to sell waterfront properties, bundled with the requirement that owners finish their own land reclamation. One factor that contributed to the success of this move was the fact that, as San Francisco's population increased, so did the need for land. The shoreline of the city moved deeper into the bay as a result of land reclamation. Some of the abandoned ships were submerged beneath landfills as a result of this process. As these ships are being rediscovered, their locations are documented, and up to 60 of them have been identified so far. But given the number of ships said to have been abandoned in the port during the gold rush, it's possible that there are still many more buried beneath the city's surface. Thanks for watching. Which of these ships interested you the most? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.